As we heard in the morning also from the excellent presentations, no one really knows what the future holds. We can only, at best, make educated estimates. According to a report published by Quest Alliance in Bangalore called Skills for Future Jobs, over 5 million young people will join the labor force every year for the next 10 years. Many of today's jobs will no longer exist. There are real threats from technological displacements and disruptions. Also, social and economic upheavals, globalization, environmental concerns are all huge game changers. Today's education needs to keep in sync with tomorrow's jobs. Studies show that no longer can we be defined by our titles and our degrees. We need to move beyond the exam system. We should not continue to make students reprographic machines and cassette recorders. Instead, we need to equip them with skills that make them employable and relevant. So while we prepare to embrace the future as we think we know it, what if the future trips us or catches us on the wrong foot? What strategies are we going to design to cope with these future uncertainties? And who will design and deliver them? To share their insights on this really critical topic, I am very pleased to introduce a brilliant panel of experienced educationists from all over India. On my right, Dr. Geeta Gandhi Kingdon and Dr. Jayshree Periwal, and on my left, Mrs. Lata Vaidyanathan and Mr. Siddharth Singh. Let's give them a really warm round of applause.
And thank you for coming on time. I know how good the lunch was. So just to put in some perspective, I personally feel there are two kinds of future. When we talk about future, one is we look at maybe 50 years beyond where we are today. And the second is immediate future. That means we all know that India is going to be the youngest country by 2035. And Prime Minister Modi said that we should be the workforce of the world. But unfortunately, nothing is happening there. And I have listed down some of the major concerns that I have, and I'll put all the concerns in an example. So there's this child. So I'm not talking about the schools who are here, because at some point that means if you're here, you're doing something in your school, you're counseling students, you're getting them placed. But we do not represent India. We do not represent, maybe we don't even represent maybe 1% of the Indian population, of the young Indian population that we are going to have in 2035. Now I'm giving you an example of a guy who is studying in a small village. So he studies in a small village and then comes to Indore, where I am from. In Indore, he comes and joins a college called ABC Khalsa College, which is running maybe in one room and is giving MBA. So now this child who has done his education from a village comes to Indore thinking that he's going to get a better education, comes and enrolls himself in a college, which is called ABC Khalsa College, and gets his MBA. Now when he moves out of the college, he's looking for a job. And then he goes for interviews and realizes that he has no skills. So now we have a child who migrated from rural India, came to the city, got his MBA, and when he's looking for a job, he has no skills. So first challenge we have is how do we make sure that our higher education institutions actually impart skills? Because this child who thinks he's an MBA won't even get a job in any of the companies, in any of the schools, and unfortunately, I'm sure all the principals and promoters who are sitting here, even counselors, when you're hiring, how long does it take to find a good candidate? How long does it take to find a good teacher? How long does it take to find a good admin person? And the main reason we have to interview continuously and we are frustrated of our B.Eds and other degrees in India is because there is lack of skills. And there is no check on higher education system. There is no accountability in the system. Now, when this child is MBA, he's not going to get a job. That means he is unemployed. Now, maybe if he had some kind of vocational skills, maybe he was good at plumbing, he was good at wood carving, he was good at maybe a contractual job, electrician, he would have got a better job. But because this guy is an MBA, he will not do those jobs because he thinks that he's not fit for those jobs. So first, I think the main challenge is making sure that India is skilled, not just educated. I have a good word for it, which I thought about. They are uneducated, educated people. So that is our main concern. Second biggest concern which I have, which I think future is, we're unsure about our future, is the government intervention I'm going to speak about. I'm sure you all know about Ashoka, and Ashoka when initially started, I remember, they had a 4-year degree program. The whole idea of private universities is that you are free to make your own curriculum. But that time I remember that UGC, I think, made it difficult for Ashoka to have a 4-year program and to have their own degrees in place, which is similar to what we have in US. So now they do a 3-year and a plus. So that's the plus 1 year is an optional year. So if the government doesn't give us freedom at this point to form our own curriculums, to make sure that we are able to impart what skills we think are necessary for the future, this kind of government intervention, I think, is very, very hampering.
Siddharth, may I pass it on to Mrs. Bedi?
Yeah, sure.
We'll come back to you.
Sure.
So, Lataji, what's your opinion about the future looking uncertain?
You know, without repeating a lot of, thank you first of all, and pleased to be on this panel. I don't want to repeat most of what he said. And just to feel what does the future hold for us, it is both an opportunity and a threat, actually. So when we look at the future and feel it's very uncertain, it actually puts us in the right pace because we will be the select few who will make the difference. Rightly, he said that people who are sitting here are all doing some things. And I want to give you 2 examples. One very recent and one very old that actually spurred me on to the journey that I have taken in education. The first one is more recent. The government of India wanted some help on how to make preschool education, that is early childhood education, and bring it into the framework of education itself, because today the National Curriculum Framework, as we all know, says a lot about the right way of doing things at the early childhood stage. So they said, you know, what is it that we must do? And here we have a problem. The early childhood education was never a part of our senior school education, or for that matter, the framework of education. And it was always a concern of the Women and Child Welfare Ministry. So what had happened was, they wanted to include the Anganwadis into the system and say that this is what we want to do. So I went into my neighboring Anganwadi and I said, okay, let me see what exactly is happening there, because a lot of people come there and do social work. And it's a community outreach program for some of the neighboring schools who need to do projects with their children. So I go into this Anganwadi and there are children from 3 years to 13 years of age. And these are all first generation, first time schoolgoers. And then I asked the teacher, I just asked her, what is your experience? Because these are all single teacher schools. And she said to me, she said, I'm BA third year. That was the answer I got, which meant that she's not even a graduate. So then I asked her, how do you manage to teach these children? So she says, all of them have the same curriculum and it is A, B, B. That way it goes. And there's one senior child standing. So I said, what is the number of enrollment? She said the number of enrollment is close to 60 in the school. And where are the children? They're all at work. All children, child labor, they're at work. And they will all come back at 1 o'clock for food. This is the ground reality of what the Anganwadis do. And it's now believed that the Anganwadis actually are within the framework and they're trying to get into MHRD and they're trying to do something about it. This is one example. The other example is a very old example when we talk of skills. I think everybody has heard this story before and I like to repeat it for perhaps impact. Thomas Alva Edison went into his manufacturing. He has a number of patents to his credit. I think all of us know that. But he went into this factory where they were manufacturing and tool bits. It was all lathe machines and he was working with tool bits, and those tool bits are supposed to increase the number of production. So they know exactly mechanically what is right or what is wrong. So he said, what's the reason why the production is so low? It should be by now, I should have seen 1,000 pieces and I'm seeing only 300 pieces, and there are these close to 25 lathe machines there. And so they said, sir, but if we increase the speed of these machines, our tool bits will break and therefore there'll be losses. So he said, okay, stop all the machines. He said, let's look at it. He asked only one machine to be on and he said, okay, let's start this work. And then they put it with 1 millimeter framework and it worked, didn't break. 2 millimeter framework, it worked, it didn't break. 3 millimeter framework, it didn't break. And 4 millimeters, it broke. So he said, all of you are laboring with 1 millimeter. If only you increase it to 3, the production rate will be much higher and the risks taken much lower. So you need to know where is it that it breaks. So I'm talking of skills, how incomplete it can be and how just a lack of knowledge acquisition and application in the skill sector can make a vital difference. Why I've pitched these 2 stories is just to say that Are we future ready? Yes, perhaps. We are not a 72-year-old nation for sure. We are a 5,000-year-old civilization and a 70 years of independent India. So I think if we can put that wisdom together, I'm a diehard optimist to believe that actually there is a solution, short-term, long-term, and we can embrace the future and the future will embrace us.
Thank you very much for beginning on that positive note. Dr. Periwal, same question to you. Do you think the future is uncertain?
It is uncertain, but it is exciting. It's a challenge, and it's great to overcome this challenge. We are humans and we are resilient. And the fact that we know that there is a challenge looking in our faces, then we know how to overcome them as much. My concern is that this world is full of disparity. The third world countries, there is very little access to education, and the ones who have it, there's a 70% dropout. Even a developing nation like ours, we have 70% of the children getting enrolled, but not even reaching grade 8. So we need to bridge this disparity. And the disparity is in education, it's in knowledge bank, it's in income, it's in health. So it's imperative for all of us as educators to see what can we do to bridge this gap. What we are doing presently is a very content-based education. And that content is going to get redundant. They're not going to use it after 20 years. After 10 years, it's going to be trashed down into the dustbins. So what is it that we need to do? We need to develop certain skills in children so they are able to adapt. What they learn, they can transfer. If they can critically analyze, then they are made for the future. And the future, they'll be able to embrace a lot better. It's like asking a child to ride a bicycle. But the child doesn't know how to put the brakes. He doesn't know how to take a U-turn. So is he going to be successful? In the same way, we keep promoting our children through exams. Even if those set of skills, understanding isn't there, we need to get away from the exam system and we need to analyze what have the children really learned. And can we not devise a plan that unless they haven't succeeded in learning that, they don't go ahead? It's okay to stay in the same class, and if there were no walls in classes, it would be so much more better. Let them learn that set of skills and then proceed further. And they can do, in a year's time, 3 years curriculum. If they know how to overcome those initial challenges, then they race much faster and they'll catch up with the other peer groups.
Thank you so much for your initial comments. We'll come back to you to explore the whole skills area. Dr. Geeta Gandhi Kingdon, what are your views on the topic?
The question is the future uncertain? It sounds like a cliche to say that, yes, absolutely, change seems to be the only constant. I think that in the next 3 decades, and obviously beyond that it's even more uncertain, but certainly in the next 3 decades we can expect to see really profound, radical change in society. And I think that it's driven by technology, and the way in which the pace of technology change is so great that today it's very much more difficult. It's always difficult to predict the future. Even the year 1018, it would have been difficult to predict what would happen in the next 30 years. In 1818, it would have been, still extremely difficult to predict it. But I think today, 200 years later, it is the pace is just so furious and so frightening that it is utterly difficult to predict what the world will look like in 30 years. So I think one aspect of this change that obviously this is going to have profound implications for the economy, for the society, for the way in which politics and institutions are run, and so forth. Obviously, it's going to have impact on jobs and new jobs being created, older jobs dying, and that will lead to profound flux in society. And change is always very difficult. Change is challenging. Once we have learned something, typically the model that we have in our lives is that by the age of roughly 20, 25, we've acquired the knowledge pretty much that we're going to acquire, and then we settle down into some profession or trade or craft. And any change that happens in our knowledge or in our way of living or our work life is relatively modest. There are little tweaks here and there. But by the age of 50, we don't like change very much. And yet the future that we're going to face is going to require constant change. Roughly every 10 years, I imagine, we have to reinvent ourselves and be something different because of this fast changing world. So I think that the implications of this for how we prepare young people to face the challenges of the future are very great indeed. And I know that we are tweaking our education system. All schools are trying to make changes here and there, bringing in, for example, higher order thinking skills questions, but doing it in a very gingerly fashion, doing it slowly, because of the fear that we don't know exactly what we need and don't want to take the risk, and what do the parents say. And I mean, in a later part, when you talk about what can be done about it and who should be doing it, I think we should focus a lot more on what are those obstacles to this transformation that needs to happen. But one aspect of change that I'd just like to pick up on, which is a little unusual, perhaps a little out of the way, but which is right here with us and is going to impact all of us very profoundly. It's already doing so and will increasingly do so in the future, is this aspect of uncertainty about, there used to be a time where there was very little information. There were no books, hardly any books, hardly any libraries, and you don't have to go very far in time. In fact, even in contemporary India, if you go to rural areas, there's a great shortage of books and of libraries and so on and so forth. But with the advent of technology, information, there's an enormous flood of information all the time. In fact, one could say there's too much information to the extent we can't even focus on anything because, just another click away, you have another universe of information waiting for you. And you're not able to focus, you're not able to make sense of it. So that has implications on the kinds of skills we need. But in amongst all this, there's one challenge in particular I wanted to highlight, which is this, that there is a great deal of, it is possible now for governments, for business interests, for multinational corporations and so on, to really get to know us better, because they can track through big data our purchasing decisions, our social networks, our comments about what we think and believe, which networks we're in. So they're homing in on us. They're like hacking human beings. The technology is able to know us better and better and better and better. And soon it should be able to track every step of ours, every action, every thought. So now the question is, do we know ourselves as well? Because if we don't, we are going to allow technology to become our master. We're going to be transferring authority to technology. Already you see young people walking around like zombies, just focusing on their phones all the time. So that is allowing technology to become your master rather than using technology to serve you. And I think that in this world, we don't need more information. What we need is to give our young people the ability to be discerning users of that information, to be able to, in particular, to look at fake news, to be able to critically analyze a piece of news that you see, rather than uncritically accepting it as God's truth, and to understand the implications of where this can lead us. Because I think it has a very powerful implication. The fact that governments can know what we do, Trump's or other people's election campaigns now tell us that through big data, they know exactly, there are these 30 women who have young children with leukemia. So they will now, their advertising will be focused, very particularized, very specific advertising for very specific groups of people to show how, if you elect me, I will be able to give you this information. I think all of this has massive implications for how we educate our children.
Thank you very much. And I think that echoes absolutely correctly with what we heard in the keynote address this morning, the advent of technology and the threats and the challenges that throws up. So I think the panel really agrees that as routine tasks become more automated, as the availability of large amount of data leads to complex decisions and choices that we can make, and as the blurring of physical and virtual spaces leads to new forms of working together in collaboration, what we really have to figure out is how to future-proof our younger generation, how to prepare them for the uncertainties that they will have to face, and how we can build certain core skills to help them develop sustainable career pathways. Which brings me to my second question, which I'm going to start with Lata ma'am, is what tools or skills are needed to ensure that today's young generation is future ready?
You know, when I pitched my first part, I really thought of tool as a tool. That's why I was trying to say something. Now, what are our tools and skills that we must? So we do hear very oft repeated skills, which are 21st century skills. We talk of communication, and this morning we heard rightly people say, don't just stop it with communication, please make sure that it's a connection. So the whole issue of how we connect, how we transform what we know, and it's actually spanning over 3 generations of learning, which is about our past, present, and future. But even more important is the fact that we are able to build on what we have and a complete understanding of where our country is and where the world is headed, and what is that connect between what we are doing and a country which promises youth for the next 20 years. Workforce. Here is a place where we just heard 1 out of 4, which means 25% of the people, all the states have been able to enroll just 25% of people into higher education. The real story is that if we needed to even enroll 30%, we were talking of 50% and 60% in the morning today, if we just needed to skill them such that they are ready for the workforce, we need, by a calculation which has been made public, and hopefully that is authentic, is that we need 1,000 more higher education, Uchatar Vidya, in this country. That is 1,000 more universities to accommodate just 30% of our people who need to go. And if the statistic is anything but the truth, then we really need to wonder how this is going to happen. You know, in the good old, I have often wondered why in our country, technical education, the STEM, STEAM, and all the things that we talk about today, why is it that we are not able to have a lateral entry into our work? Because there will always be dropouts in our country, depending on the socioeconomic situation at varying levels. Starting from year 10, which is after the RT and the Public School Act, we will see children drop out after 10th, we'll see children drop out after 12th, after graduation, and so on and so forth. And this is a terrible state, because if you look at the general scenario of what our education sector has to offer, you very clearly see that there are lots of sectors. We're talking of the 4th industrial age, right? We have people right now even in the first one. So that is the layers and layers of complexity this country alone has. And if that is anything but true, then the challenge of skilling our people to meet with our future challenges is huge. And look at the technology disruption that is happening across both our industries as also our services. So are our children job ready? Are our youth job ready? Is something we really need to think about very deeply, because if that has to happen, then we also need to look at things like flexible degrees. We need to see skill orientation. We need to see the connect between industries and education. We need to also see flexible certification of job readiness, which actually puts them into the proper workforce, and also enlargement, enhancement on jobs, so that when one set of jobs disappear from the market as if it never happened, which lasted for 10 years, you get up in the morning and find all those jobs have disappeared. All the data processors will now be out of jobs because we need more analysts. So if all of that is true, then we need to see how quickly we can change. It's not enough if we just provide, but also the quickness in change. So look at this entire scenario, how complex it is. First of all, the socioeconomic status, access to education, quality, and all of that. And secondly, how do they get into the workforce? And 3, when they get into the workforce, how long they can stay there? And 4th, how obsolete is our system at times in certain parts? Because we often find that there are institutions where people are rushing in for admissions, be it schools or colleges, and we are finding that there are still seats vacant in some places. So we need to ask the bigger question. For all of this, if the government is ready, then is it true that the government has actually failed us? It may be extremely unpopular view of mine to say that there is no political will. Because somebody is going to question, do you think all this has happened because there's no political will? There is, but has it been adequate? We can all be accused of all that. There is inadequate preparation. It is not that there is no preparation. So I want to say that in the process of skilling, and there's one thing more which we recognized in one of our NCRT meetings, I want to tell you that it was so difficult just to get the Women and Child Ministry, the MHRD, and the Skill Development Ministry, which has just come up, to sit together to draft just the primary school syllabus, let alone the secondary and the senior school syllabus. So when we look at the larger picture and the fine details, what I call the searchlight vision and the laser focus, I think there's a huge gap. But the good news, however, is that all of us who are sitting here together and in the larger hall, and perhaps millions of such replicas across the country and the world, are looking at what will make this easy. And I really want to say this before I hand over the mic, is that I was listening to Dr. Mashelkar, somebody whom I greatly, greatly admire. And he said once very beautifully, he said, you know, a child-centered home and a family-centric society and an education-centered country is going to be the only hope. But he also said, don't be disappointed, because they are like lilies. And lilies have this huge ability to double every night. So one becomes in geometric proportion. So it's 1, 2, 4, 8. That's the way it goes. And then it won't take the next 70 years to reach where we want to. Because when was it half empty? Only yesterday. So I think there's great hope. We will tool, we will skill, and we will make sure that our children do well.
Thank you. So moving on in geometric progression, Jayshree ji, what are your comments on the skills that we need?
Kim, I'm going to ask all of you. Can you see these 2 dots on this piece of paper? What do you think is the shortest way to connect them? Straight line?
Fold the paper.
I'm glad that some of us think that we can fold the paper, and we can. That's the skill that we need to have in our kids. How to mold, how to adapt, and not think only in one direction. I'm so happy that some of us do think like that, and we encourage our children also to think like that. You know, traditional classrooms where it's teacher-centric, we found out the results, and they are bell-shaped. So they are children who haven't learned enough, and maybe some have. But the study did was that they had one teacher to one child, and they saw the graph, it peaked. So the question comes, is it possible for us to have a teacher teaching just one child? Looks strange, probably not. But the same technology, if used correctly, enhances and helps our children. If there's a computer screen in front of them and they are getting taught by that one screen at your own pace, if the curriculum, if the app is so designed, which is getting designed, and some of us in some schools we've already begun using it, so child is learning at his or her pace. Unless he doesn't understand it, he cannot move ahead. And that's what I want to propagate, that can we use technology, can we use the digital world and empower children? There will be equality, there will be equal opportunity, equal content, equal knowledge, equal assessment to everybody around the world. We want teachers not like a sage on a stage or by their side. We want them as meddlers in the middle. Imagine flipped classrooms. We in our school do often practice this, that a video is already sent to the children at home, they've watched it, they've deliberated, and now they come to class and there are discussions. So a teacher is not standing and delivering lectures. What she's doing, that she's helping a few here, talking to some, asking others to come in and join in a little debate, deliberation, and there isn't one human being who knows it all. The children have enough capability to empower a classroom. And that's what I want all of us to encourage our children to open up and not get restricted. You shouldn't have finger on your lips, please just remove that and let them answer, let them question. Today is a world that we don't want children to answer questions. They should be asking questions. We should be encouraging them to do so. There are skills of taking risks. We must allow that. We must encourage them to try to fail. It's okay. Children who have not failed in the sense, failed in a particular problem, in some understanding, they have not tried. So if they've not tried, they haven't ever learned. The more they try, the more they learn. And today is a world of collaboration. We want children to be imaginative, to be curious. Everything is available on your smartphones. All the content that you require. But do you have the desire to explore? Or do you want to play games on it? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. Can we make this technology interesting? Can we see how children learn more through visuals, through auditory, through drama, through dance? Can physical education, can music, drama be in the mainstream education and not left as an activity? When we look at risk-taking of our children, we'll say, let them do it as a CAS activity. Let them do as a volunteer work. No, we need it in the classroom every single day. Things they've never tried, never done, let them explore, let them reinvent, let them innovate. And that's where our role begins. That we begin to encourage our children to take on roles, do peer evaluation, do self-evaluation, and not leave everything to the teachers. The teachers just come around and motivate children to explore and enhance themselves.
Lots of interesting ideas there. Thank you very much. Very well. Geeta ji, skills.
Right. The skills needed to be future ready. Am I audible?
Yes.
As I said before, there's no scarcity of information anymore. In fact, there's oodles of it, countless things that are just available. And it's like I feel that the skills that are needed is not more information given to children, but giving them the tools with which they can make sense of that information. Skills of collating information, interpreting information, analyzing information, communicating information to others, and taking the skill that enables a child to take a real world problem and find solutions to it by drawing upon their knowledge sources from different disciplines. So that's collation. So I think that these are the kinds of skills that are needed. The ability to tell what's important, what's unimportant, being able to sift through a lot of information and being able to home in on what's important and what's not. So I think that these are the various different kinds of skills, being able to combine different types of, different bits of information to come up with a whole picture, a credible or a coherent picture. I think what we are doing in schools at the moment is giving a kind of a predefined set of skills. So for example, in chemistry, we want children to learn to be able to identify particular chemicals, in a test tube. In computing, we may not want them to write code in C++. In languages, we want them to learn German and be able to converse in German, and so on and so forth. So I think that we're focusing on developing a predetermined set of skills. However, we don't know what the future will look like, even in 30 years, let alone more. So therefore, I think it's not very sensible anymore to just pick on a few skills that we have decided that these are the important skills to learn and impart those, and that's the end of education. It's clearly hopelessly inadequate to have that model. And we need to, it may be that in very near future, artificial intelligence will enable, Google Translate will enable people to flawlessly converse in German without knowing German. They may be speaking their own language, but what comes out is another language. So similarly, you're teaching somebody to do C++, but artificial intelligence will be a far better coder than the human being. So I think that it's very likely that the predetermined sets of information that we are trying to impart will become obsolete. They'll become irrelevant very soon. And therefore, I think it's much more important to have the skills. I didn't have the advantage of attending the morning session in which you said some of these kinds of skills were listed. But if I was to list them, it would be skills of communication would be a very, very important skill. And I totally agree that it's not just communication but connection. Collaboration would be an extremely important skill. Creativity, because you cannot predict the future. Therefore, being creative and being able to get whatever Another very important skill is developing in children the ability to adapt to change, because change is going to be so frequent now, and not lose their mental balance when they're faced with too much change. So I think that resilience will be very, very important as well. So, in order not to get into comfort zones and become too, how shall I say, ossified in particular roles, but the flexibility. So now the question is how, and I think that's the one that we really need to move on.
Great. Siddharth, I'll turn to you for this final round of this question. What skills do you think we need?
I think we have all heard of the word STEAM. It used to be STEM, then it became STEAM.
Yeah.
So I have a completely different take on the word altogether, and some of the things have already been mentioned. So first, I'll just go over the whole list. So skills that can be self-reflective awareness of your own skills, capacity and the capacity to improve on them over time, as mentioned before. Tactics, decisiveness, assertiveness, and confidence in the face of difficult situations, and not being scared of failing. Ethics, moral awareness put into systematic thoughts. Students, especially in the future, they should be aware as to what effects their actions are going to have on the larger society. So ethics is very, very important. Articulation, ability to imagine, formulate thoughts, being creative, and learn to express opinions. Multiculture, the last word. Cultural awareness, being sensitive, and ability to reflect and learn and unlearn, as we have said before, and also have some kind of ability to understand and change yourself when you're going to different cultures, not judging any other culture. So skills, tactics, ethics, articulation, and multiculture. I think these are the skills which are more important than science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Can I just take 15 seconds from you?
Okay, your time starts now.
Yeah, my time starts now. Completely propelled by my co-panelists, fail, the way Dr. Kalam talks about fail, first attempt in learning. He talked of that. And he said something very interesting. He said self-reflective skills. I just want to draw a 2-second line on that and say that, it was very interesting to watch that there is a program out in the West, and it's not very difficult for us to emulate or at least adapt it in certain ways. It's called the Met High Schools. How many of you have heard of the Met High Schools in the US now? And I think the program is not more than 5 years old, 5 to 8 years old. And here, the 13 to 15-year-olds, I was so completely smitten that I'm compelled to talk to you about it, is that 13, 14-year-old kids, they have been asked, after they complete grade 8, they are asked, what do you want to do? So somebody says, I want to be a pilot, somebody says, I want to be a chef, somebody says, I want to be an engineer, blah, 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 whatever. And then they come into these high schools, and they are, I think, about 8 or 9 of them all over the country. And they come there and they write, we are talking of finding our own curriculum. These children are asked to write their own curriculum as to both identify the problem and then solve it. Otherwise, we pose the problem, even today when we are trying to say that, we're getting them creatively engaged. We pose a problem, say, okay, how are we going to start? For example, the drainage issue in your neighborhood, for example. So here, they're asked to first identify the professions they want to be in. We may argue that it's too early an age to do so, but those that don't want will continue the normal schools, and these children can come into these schools. And the only compulsory subjects being the skills of learning language to whatever ends, and the skills of learning arithmetic to whatever ends. And the rest of it, they charter, they shadow, and about 3/4 hours of the time are outside of the school premises. So I'm looking at the entire trajectory of what skills can do and how it can be done to make it so much more exciting. Very exciting times.
Thank you very much. I think what we're trying to say is that while knowledge teaches us what, skills teach us how. Can we have some silence there, please, ma'am? Sorry. Okay. So I think the need of the hour is to have, as our panel members have said, a holistic set of skills, such as creativity, communication, connection, problem solving, and so on. In fact, just to add to what our panel members have already said, the National Academy of Sciences has grouped something called the 21st Century Clusters. And they list various competencies under 3 broad heads. These are cognitive competencies, intrapersonal competencies, and interpersonal competencies. And one which really struck me when I read, similar to what Geeta ji just said, is the tolerance for ambiguity. which means the ability to be comfortable with uncertainty, unpredictability, conflicting directions, and multiple demands. Basically, the ability to operate effectively in an uncertain environment. Now, how are we going to teach that? I don't know. That's obviously a challenge. Now, for the critical issue, whose responsibility is this? Teaching all these soft skills, life skills, whatever we want to call them. What is the role of students, parents, the education system, the government, industry, society? I'm going to start with Dr. Periwal, if I may. Who do you think, or rather, how do these targets get achieved? Who needs to be involved, and how will this be implemented? What are your thoughts about this? How do we move forward?
I think we can achieve them when there are equal opportunities. Curriculums are not designed for the entire world. Exam systems year after year are abolished. There should be joy of learning. Children should be excited to come to school. They should feel happy because they're going to learn something new. They shouldn't be coming to the Anganwadis just to have food, as ma'am said. What is important is that they should come to school, that something exciting is going to happen, and we are going to participate and we are going to engage. We must not learn like robots. We should not work like robots. They will do their job. We need the more humanistic values in the classroom. If we can share, we can learn together, we can do co-blogging. It's important. When there is a question, can we turn it into a project? We want children to do 3D printing. Can we ask them, can we teach them 3D thinking? Those become so important in their lives. And how are we going to achieve them? We need the government, we need the policymakers, we need the industry, we need the teachers, and above all, we need parents. We need everybody's support, because if we go in different directions, the car will not move. हम सब गाड़ी के पहिए हैं, एक भी टूटेगा, फिसलेगा, the car will not move forward. So we need to keep everybody in tandem, working in collaboration, giving ideas, deliberating on them, looking at statistics, understand where are the problem areas, how do we rectify that. Only then we can move ahead. Otherwise, it's going to be a difficult task. Future is uncertain, but we will overcome that uncertainty.
So, a collaborative effort. Dr. Kingdon, what do you think about this issue?
Yeah, I think certain kinds of skills still have to be created within the classroom, obviously with creative thinking. So critical thinking is one of those things that teachers still have a very important role in helping to develop critical thinking skills, and a whole range of appreciation, for example, literary appreciation, and all the things that we would expect from a liberal education. So I think that the way in which children are assessed needs to change profoundly, because even with the best will in the world, even if the teachers and schools are willing, if the curricula which are prescribed from above, by government or by exam boards, don't change, if the assessment is still rewarding rote learning, then even if the teachers want it, schools want it, it cannot happen, because parents will not like it that marks, that schools are focusing on things that don't gain the marks. So therefore, I think there has to be a very important central role for government and exam boards to reform curricula and assessments, to be more in line with this agenda of reform. That's really, really important. Secondly, I think within schools, when it comes to schools and teachers, they need to recognize that there are these massive, changes happening right now, and the implications of that for their classroom and schooling practice. Mm-hmm. I think that there's very little appreciation of the fact that there's massive changes happening. And I think that I think Ms. Vaidyanathan works for the ETSIL as well. You're chairing ETSIL. So, you know the reality of the government school system better than most of us. And, when we talk about what change needs to happen, wherever it is that many of the private schools of the country are, government schools, by and large, many of them, most of them perhaps, are really, are not even there in many respects. So I think that these and they needn't traverse the same stages that private schools have gone through. They can straight away go from where they are, where they're struggling to impart the basic, reading, writing, arithmetic skills. They can go from that to where we need to be. So they don't need to traverse the same trajectory. But the point is that we need to, teachers need to accept it and need to be prepared to take that risk, that because even though we don't know what the future holds, that if we give these children these skills to think for themselves, to critically analyze, to interpret, correlate, all the things that Siddharth has mentioned and others have mentioned, all of those, if they can move to imparting those, that is a little bit of a risk to move away from preset, predetermined curricula. But to recognize that much more of this needs to happen. Now, one more thing, and that is, I believe, really critically important. I think Siddharth alluded to that as well. The point is this, that now children have information, they have access to all the world's information on their handheld, good and bad. If we do not equip them to distinguish good from bad, or at least to learn who they are, so that they can decide whether what they are seeing is in accordance with what they are, and whether they will accept it or reject it. If we don't equip them with that facility, with that faculty, then we should be really, not doing them a favor. I think we'd be letting them down very badly. So I think what's really, really important is to help children. This is the job of schools and parents, both, teachers and parents both. Help equip the children with the knowledge of who they are. It's not so much that we need to tell them who they are. We need to help them to discover who they are. And that's really important, to inure them, to protect them against this onslaught of what is often very bad influences on them and inappropriate influences on them. And indeed, not just that, it is the fact that there is active effort to manipulate our thinking. It could be by business interests, it could be by politicians. Therefore, it is extremely important that children are mentally equipped to understand the ethics of it and to know who they are, so that they can judge appropriately and act appropriately.
Sure. Siddharth, who's going to do this?
I think as what has already been said, I think all stakeholders, it's very, very important that we all participate in this journey. But I just want to talk about something very important, is that what kind of curriculum should we go for? I sometimes see many people shooting down the Indian curriculum and the Indian system. But at the same time, I think we might be doing something right, because so many CEOs are from India, so many people working in NASA are from India, and we see Indians doing well all over the world. And most of them are from Indian curriculum. And in fact, just a small example, because I know we are running out of time. I had the opportunity of seeing Howard Gardner in conversation with someone called Stephen Wolfram, who is the creator of Wolfram Alpha. And he's a certified genius. And they were having a conversation about what are the 21st century mathematical skills that are required to be successful. And during that conversation, one of the students from Harvard asked them that, do you think experiential learning is more important than rote learning, or rote learning is more important? What is their view on it? Because I know in India we are struggling on that question. That is experiential learning important? There are schools who are only doing experiential learning, and they have taken away the books, the copies. And they said something very, very important, which is very relevant to our country. They said that certain amount of rote learning is important, because rote learning gives you rigor, and rigor is what takes you ahead in life. That is what they said, and I think I believe with that our curriculum should have certain amount of rote learning with elements of experiential learning and other skills that are required to be successful in life. At the same time, and they also said that you cannot go to a computer to create a computer. So that, I think that resonated with me, that in a way that yes, because how can you create something if you don't remember? So that is where I think the Indians, that our system of that rote learning actually helped in some way. There are students who have done well, they have gone, they are CEOs of some of the biggest companies. But at the same time, we need to relook our system, because we are talking about the future, we are talking about different skills that are required. So we need to change, but at the same time keep that soul with us, with that the hard work, which is that soul of hard work which we have. So I think that is very important. And I think one last thing, that I understand that Indians are will always be concerned with their marks, because we are a country, even IB, I see a lot of IB schools saying how many students got 45. So it doesn't matter what curriculum we shift to.
Yes.
It's CBSE or IB or A levels. I think we are obsessed by marks and by results, and so are our parents. All they want to know is how many kids got 45 in your school. you know, they don't. I'm sure they don't ask you something else. So I don't know how that will change, but I hope that it does.
So Lataji, just to wrap up with you on this question, who is going to do this?
Yeah, so I just heard you say the 21st century competencies, cognitive, interdependency, and interpersonal and
Intrapersonal.
intrapersonal. So I think all three are very important, and we are trying to do everything within the classroom, and most of it has been mentioned by my co-panelists. My one real thing that really helps me understand who's going to do it is, I think it pitches on three important aspects. One is the resources, one is the action, and one is the beliefs. When it comes to the resources, we need to look at both the material resource, the human resource, the financial resource, the policy directives, and a whole lot of such things which basically do the frameworking as far as the government is concerned. But it ends there, because beyond that, all action, the next action is with us. So operating within those framework, I think we need to see how much of disruption we can actually do. And each one of us is actually capable of those disruptions, because we are looking into these competencies, we are looking into these skills mentioned by all of us here sitting here. And I think when we try doing all of that, we need to be very focused on not the giving, but also the taking, and also making that ecosystem of learning so friendly and so useful that people, as we just heard people say, the joy of coming, the joy of being assessed, the joy of being tested, the joy of learning, all of which must be there in place, and there are 1,000 ways to do it. We cannot ignore technology and the belief in it, because it is bound to stay, it is bound to take over, it has already taken over. So if it has taken over, then we really need to understand the sifting and the sorting of information, the correctness, the relevant of the information, and like we heard this morning, what is relevant and what is right. The ability to sift that issue is what lies with all of us as educators. It's very important to do that. All the while, we have been having assessment driving cognition in this country, in all our education systems. Wherever there's a test, there is a way to crack it, whether it is 45 points or whether it's a 97 point. But I think the most important link IC3 needs, and as a part of it that we are sitting here today, is to strengthen that link between higher education and school, and not function in isolation. If they do not understand that schooling is not about cutoffs, it's not about clusters of subjects, are both, whether it is any board under the sun, all of them allow us to do music and physics, but the Indian higher education system has not permitted that, and therefore these cutoffs dictate the entire downward progression in education, and that must break. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will be wrapped on my knuckles if I don't ask for some questions from the audience. So since we're running out of time, do I have your permission to continue for 5 more minutes? We'll stop at 2:10. So I'll take 2 questions. If you could just identify yourself and ask your question very briefly. Ma'am, in the first row, please. I'm not sure if you have a mic, but I'm sure you can. Yeah, sure.
Teacher's voice.
Okay, absolutely.
Namaste, I'm Uttara Singh from the Sri Ram Millennium School, Noida. My question, ma'am, is we've been talking to Lata, ma'am. We've been talking about the future looks uncertain. And most of the panelists, all of us have been focusing on the future for our children. I really want to know, how is the future for us as educators, as teachers? How are we preparing our teachers to face this future? I really don't find too many training opportunities for my teachers. International curriculum is offering it. Our Indian curriculum doesn't offer any training opportunities, or very limited ones.
Sure.
Private schools, sorry,
I think you made
private
your
schools
point, yeah.
still do it. What about our government schools?
Thank you.
I want to know what's going to happen.
Great.
You know, I just very brief answer to this is that, you know, once someone whom I again respect from the Springdale's Education Society, Mrs. Kumar, the grand old patriarch of this, or matriarch of this, she once said very beautifully, she said, you know, don't wait for someone to set up these institutes for you. Just go there out and do it yourself. And she said the best way to also make sure that that smoke will always rise to the top, so you can't live in your ivory towers. So when you form your training centers, training modules, ask questions, find answers, and include all your stakeholders, please make sure that the neighboring government schools, the neighboring Kendriya Vidyalayas, there's so much of wisdom all over there, and we actually understand the difficulties there. Get all of them together and find solutions. We really don't want answers from the top. We have we can find our answers. Let's get involved together. That togetherness and this elitism in education must also somewhere get a little diluted, at least for our own sake.
Thank you so much. Sir, would you like to pose your question quickly?
For Siddharth and Ms. Lata again, see, we started off talking about the equality and availability of access for children. See, another thing that I could hear very loud was the policies that are made by the government. See, where we are consciously diluting the benchmarks that we use for measuring, see, any valuable outcome. How do you think that the government can actually contribute anymore? See, I see that the MHRD, the different education boards in the country are consciously diluting the levels.
Sure.
See,
Okay, let's hear Siddharth's views on that. Thanks for the question.
Which would definitely say that it's a little more difficult for educators to look at how we can build this capacity in.
Okay.
And when we're talking about stakeholders, who do we service? I think I would rather look at the client, and the client here is the student.
Sure.
So I would like to see how we all of us contribute to servicing them.
See,
Thank you.
that's absolutely right. That we are end of the day working for the students. Now, as ma'am gave an example of Anganwadis and how things are happening. Even I have gone to several government schools where there are 8 classes happening in a single classroom, and the other classroom has been taken over as the office of the sarpanch. You know, so all these things do happen in the country, and I think they happen because we have lack of accountability in the system. For example, if the teacher is teaching in a government school, what kind of examination, what about the results, what about the teacher's accountability to the system, the principal's accountability to the system? In private schools, we are very accountable because the parents won't come to you otherwise. The results are, you are accountable for placements, that's why we all are here, we are accountable for the sports, their art, their everything. So I feel, one, that because we have different state boards, I do believe that we should have minimum levels of learning, and we should have a single board in the country, maybe single curriculum in the country. Yes, and in different languages maybe. And we should have minimum levels of learning established, not results, because if you have results in class 5, parents will go crazy with that. So just minimum levels of learning, so that inculcates accountability in the system. So I think that is one way to start off.
Okay, thank you.
Just one line on that. I think we need to be strong enough to influence policy. I'm sure we can do it. It's not that we can't. We have to sit up somewhere and scream loud, not just in these halls which are so comfortable, but right out there. Do we have the courage to write about it? Do we know our ailments? Are we talking about it loud and clear? I will someday have the guts to do it. Next. Yeah, I know Geeta. Yes, Geeta does it. I think so. That's so true. So I think some of us are making differences, and it will come out loud and clear someday.
So I'm going to wrap up, and if you have more questions, please stay in the room. The panel will stay here. So I think what we realize is through this 1 hour discussion that we can no longer procrastinate our future readiness with the hope that somehow some things will work out. We have to empower the youth, and through direct or indirect experiential learning, as we've been talking about, so that the future offers them hope rather than fear. We need innovative ideas to stimulate change that can future-proof our communities and societies. And what is required now for this group here is to translate those ideas into ground realities. I want to close with a quote by Japanese philosopher Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, who also has established various peace, culture, and education institutions. Dr. Ikeda writes, "Youth must bear the burden of the future, but it is the educators who must open the doors of the life force of the young. Whether young people will be vigorous enough to revolutionize our age depends on the attitudes of the men and women who educate them." So I think this panel certainly believes that it is incumbent on each one of us present in the room here today, in our own respective roles and capacities, to take this theme up very seriously and in fact make it a lifelong mission. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience, and please thank our wonderful panel members.
Thank you to the chair.
Thank you.